Okay, so in our second video, what we're going to do now is look at financial performance. Um, and so we've looked at primarily the balance sheet and the income statement, and we know there's a lot of numbers on those sheets, and we know there's a lot of numbers, uh, and we don't necessarily, when we glance at it the first time, know exactly what everything is right away. That's okay. We also recognize that we can't look at 500 different companies at the same time and look at one particular characteristics. They are different in terms of size, they are different in terms of industry, they are different in terms of operating scale. Some of them use a lot of operating expenses, others use large fixed expenses. It gets really messy really, really quickly. And so one of the things we like to do is use financial ratios to um, to compare different companies, to compare the same company over time. They're very helpful for financial professionals internally. The problem for you, the student on financial ratios, is that there's a lot of them. There are hundreds of financial ratios out there. Here in the book, we're going to focus on 10, 15, 20 of them that are the most popular, that are the most commonly used. And likewise, they can be overwhelming if you look at all of them on a big list. So we're going to try to break them up for you into four or five different categories. You can see that slide on your screen already, but it'd be nice to put a little cheat sheet together of your own ratios so you can figure out where they come from, how they're constructed, and more importantly, what they mean, because every ratio is trying to tell you something. Uh, let's figure out what those ratios are and what they're trying to tell you, and then it's going to be up to you to be able to calculate these for quizzes and tests in the future. Okay, so first, I need to go to start inking. Boom. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is look at the different categories. So there's five, right? There's liquidity ratios. These tell you how liquid the company is, obviously. Activity ratios. These tell you about the different movements inside of a company. They measure the speed at which a firm converts various accounts into sales or cash. Uh, Debt ratios. These are obvious. These measure debt. They usually measure debt in terms of, here it is, total assets. Uh, Profitability ratios, these are very, very interesting to both investors and internal managers and owners. We want to know how we're doing. And when we work with profitability ratios, we'll be working down the income statement. We'll get into that in a second. And market ratios. Market ratios are some of my favorite because I'm an investments guy. I'm an investments researcher. So I want to know what PE ratios look like, and I want to know what market values are, valuations, and all that kind of thing to try to make decisions for, uh, as an investor, try to decide whether or not I'm going to come into the market by buying the stock of the firm. All right. So we talked about that. Let's talk about liquidity ratios. Okay. So liquidity ratios, first and foremost, can be found are calculated using current assets and liabilities. Where are current assets and liabilities? They are on the balance sheet. So this guy's on the balance sheet, and this guy's on the balance sheet. Current assets measures our ability to pay in the short term. Current liabilities tells us current assets tells us how much we have in easily convertible assets, stuff that we can turn into cash very quickly. And current liabilities tells us how much we have to pay in the short term. So what we want to know here is how much cash do we have, and how much do we owe, and the current ratio tells us whether or not we're able to make those payments. The difference between the current ratio and the quick ratio is obviously inventory. Terrible square. Is obviously inventory. And why is it that we're interested in inventory? We're interested in inventory because inventory, while it's considered a current asset, may not necessarily be convertible into cash in a short-term basis. So if we look at, and let's say that this is cash and this is inventory, there's going to be a certain amount of time, there's a certain amount of time that we need before time turns into cash, and I want to know what my cash or quickly convertible assets are compared to liabilities. It gives us a more, not better, but a more direct view of our ability to pay uh, liquidity ratios, or to pay our current liabilities. Um, so those are basically the two big liquidity ratios you need to have in mind. Current ratio and quick ratio. You get all of this from the balance sheet. Activity ratios. Activity ratios are all over the place because they're going to measure a whole bunch of different things. Inventory turnover, average collection period, average payment period. These guys are going to tell us how long it takes us to get paid. This guy's going to tell us, I'm sorry, yes, and then average payment period tells us how long it takes us to pay. Fixed asset turnover and total asset turnover are measures of sales depending on our fixed assets. So let's go through these really quickly. Cost of goods sold, income statement. Income statement over inventory. Inventory is going to be usually on the balance sheet. Um, accounts receivable is going to be a snapshot in time, so that is going to be on the balance sheet. Sales per day is going to be an operating uh, calculation. That one you're going to have to just come up with. It's not going to be necessarily on those uh, on the income statement per se, but you can calculate what your total sales are over a time period, right? So you know what? Let's talk about that for just a second. Average sales per day. How would you calculate average sales per day? Well, we can look at sales. Let's say we have an income statement that is 1 month, okay? So it's a 30-day income statement, right? And our total sales for the 30 days was $300,000 over 30 days. Well, how do you measure what your average sales are per day? You divide 300,000 by 30 days. That cancels that, and that turns into 1. And you can tell that your average sales per day is going to be $10,000 a day. Does that make sense? So this actually is on an income statement. You may just have to calculate it depending on the variety of the income statement and what it looks like. What happened to my thing? Let me see if I can use this eraser here to get back to normal. All right, maybe we can do that more often. The same thing for the average payment period, okay? Except we're not going to compare it against accounts receivable. We're going to compare it amount across accounts payable. What are our average purchases per day? And that's an expense that you can calculate from the income statement. This one, income statement. Although accounts payable is going to be on your balance sheet. So what's important here on fixed asset turnover and total asset turnover is that we're looking at our sales. And we're looking at a ratio of our sales depending on a certain type of asset. And here we're looking at next fixed assets. Okay, so fixed assets, we're looking at our big investments and we're looking to see how our sales are doing compared to our big investments. And so if you own a company that makes bricks, for example, and you have to purchase this huge, acreage and a large series of multi-million-dollar manufacturing processes, it's going to be different than if you open up a retail store and and your fixed assets are, a desk and some sales floor equipment. And we want to measure what our sales look like depending on the type of industry that we're in to see if we're doing well. And not dissimilarly, total assets are uh, all of our assets, not just our fixed assets. So that's our activity ratios. Debt ratios are relatively common sense. Debt ratio, this is the big one here, the very common debt ratio. We want to look at everything that we owe times everything that we have, and we want to make sure that that doesn't get out of hand. Investors are going to look at this and say, hey, how much are you paying out to the banks that you're not paying out to me, and those kinds of decisions. Assets to equity, debt to equity, long-term debt to stockholders' equity. These ratios are going to tell investors something about your preferences in terms of your capital structure. Do you prefer to get money from debt or do you prefer to get money from your investors? Times interest earned is earnings before interest and taxes. Remember EBIT divided by our interest expense. And you'll get both of these off of the income statement. Debt ratios, fairly easy to calculate. But profitability ratios are very exciting ratios for finance folks because they walk down